While most of us enjoy nights out with friends, we rarely consider the negative consequences. There is always going to be an element of risk when going out for drinks after dark. But what if one of those nights turned out to be your last? Sadly, this would be the case for Denise Huber, when, after a night out, she failed to return home. But what happened after her disappearance, and who was to blame? Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, folks. My name is Adrian, and welcome back to another video by Coffee House Crime. Today we're looking at the case of Denise Huber. And as always, just to let you know that I post solved, unsolved, and strange cases here weekly, so if that's your kind of thing, please consider subscribing to Coffee House Crime. Now with that said, let's begin today's case. Go grab yourself a coffee, pull up a seat, and sit back. This is the case of Denise Huber. Grab your sunscreen and your favourite pair of flip-flops. Our journey today takes us stateside, over to the east coast of California. We're zeroing in to an area known as Orange County, and Orange County's name plays no tricks. It's an area teeming with sunny beach resorts, sprawled around two famous theme parks. With Disneyland Anaheim and Knott's Berry Farm, Orange County is a very desirable place to visit for a holiday and has plenty to do. With its beautiful weather, it takes advantage of its coastline with many harbours, most of which are backdropped by the urban sprawl. Today we're heading to Newport Beach, and it's here that we meet 23-year-old Denise Huber. Still classed as a young adult, Denise and her brother Jeff still lived at home with their parents, Father Dennis and Mother Ione Huber. So I apologise in advance if the names Dennis and Denise start melding together, but Denise was born on the 22nd of November 1967. She had a positive upbringing with two loving parents, and the family engaged in a pleasant lifestyle within the lively beach town. This environment suited Denise well. In her younger years, she was described as bubbly, vibrant, fun-loving, and someone you wanted to be around. Denise's support from her parents allowed her to excel in school. She was well-liked, received good grades, and eventually attended the University of California, Irvine to study social science. Denise was outgoing and also attractive, and this didn't go unnoticed by those around her. Throughout her young life, she had several boyfriends, but none of them would stick around for too long. She enjoyed going to events and parties whenever given the opportunity, and being an avid fan of the Sacramento Kings, she would often go to the local basketball games. Now, another one of her hobbies included her supporting her favourite bands, and on the 2nd of June 1991, Denise planned to see English solo artist Morrissey at the Forum in Inglewood. Denise had always loved the alternative rock genre that England brought to the US, so she jumped at the chance to see Morrissey play live. In the few months prior, she had recently gotten into a relationship with her new boyfriend Stephen, and although the two had planned to go together, Stephen was unable to attend last minute. He instead insisted that she go with their mutual friend Rob Calvert. The three of them worked together at the Spaghetti Factory, so they all knew each other well enough. Besides, it could be unsafe for an attractive young woman to go all alone. Pulling up to Rob's house at around 7:30 p.m, Denise wore a short black dress, stockings and high heels. Rob offered to drive, but after looking at his car, she insisted they go in her car instead. On the way to the concert, the pair stopped at a liquor store, bought some vodka and orange juice and mixed the two over ice, a cocktail that is commonly known as a screwdriver. The two of them arrived at the Forum Club in Inglewood at around 8 p.m, where they then sat back in Denise's car and conversed over a couple of mixed drinks. A few shots later, and they were ready to get the night going. There is nothing eventful to report about the concert. A few more drinks were had, the two enjoyed their night, and the gig ended at around 11:30 p.m. However, saying that, they were not quite ready to end the night just yet. Denise drove them to a bar on Long Island, where they had a couple of beers before leaving the bar at around 1:30 a.m. With work the next day, they decided to call it a night. And after safely arriving at Rob's house at around 2 a.m, Denise bid farewell to her friend as she set off for her own home. However, and unfortunately, as the saying often goes around here, very little did Rob know that this would be the last time he would see Denise alive. June the 3rd, 1991. Dennis and Ione woke up to another typical workday. Assuming Denise was asleep in her bedroom, they didn't bother to check in on her, but her parents began to notice when she failed to get up for work. Heading over to her bedroom, they found it empty, with everything left the same way it was the night before. Now, Denise was a 23-year-old woman and not a teenager, so although she lived with her parents, she had free rein to come and go as she pleased. However, saying that, she was a very sensible graduate who held down 2 jobs, and it was very unlike her to not return home when she had work the following day. With it being a Monday, the pair went off to work, expecting to see Denise later on that afternoon. But after returning home several hours later, she was still nowhere to be found. With their concerns growing, they called her workplace, a few of her close friends, and even the local police departments, but still nothing came up. They therefore made the decision to report her as missing. Just in case she had heard from their daughter, the Hubers called Denise's best friend, Tammy Brown, but unfortunately no dice. She too was wondering where Denise was. Tammy made several phone calls to mutual friends, and this included Rob, who was, at the time, the last known person to see her. To try and find any sign of Denise, Tammy drove around the area, and on her way to the Huber household, there it was. She spotted Denise's car parked on the side of the Corona Del Mar freeway, a short distance away from her home in Newport Beach. But why was her car here? Tammy immediately called Denise's parents, where she waited for them to arrive before checking the car, as she was too scared to do so alone. With the car's flat rear tyres and the hazard lights ominously flickering by, the vehicle was left in an abnormal state. The trio would find nothing inside, however, and there was no sign of Denise, with the keys to her car still missing. It appeared that perhaps Denise had left to go and get help. Needless to say, but in the year 1991, mobile phones were not yet common. But Denise's car was close to several payphones, a motel, and a walkway leading into town. This, of course, was not a comforting fact. The search for Denise began as the sun rose the following day. It truly was a county-wide effort, with police, family, friends, and the public all being involved in the operation. Posters were put up across local towns and cities. TV appeals were aired and billboards raised. However, all of these efforts unfortunately led to nothing. Police dogs would detect her scent from the vehicle, but then lost it 25 meters down the freeway. Otherwise, no sign of Denise was found anywhere, and her car, haphazardly left behind, revealed no clues as to where she could have gone. As the days turned into weeks, and eventually into months, both Dennis and Ione grieved for the missing daughter, with their minds plagued with speculation and horror. The hardest part to her disappearance was not knowing what exactly happened to Denise. And this story of the girl next door who had suddenly vanished while on a night out gripped the hearts and minds of Orange County and people afar. Although everyone was aware of it, the case of Denise Huber would sadly turn cold. And as the case hit the 3-year mark, both Dennis and Ione would wonder if they would ever find out what happened to their daughter. That would be until a seemingly random encounter would blow the case wide open. The date was July the 13th, 1994. In an area just outside of Prescott in Arizona, Elaine Court and her partner Jack were heading to a home of a local man to purchase some paint. They had previously met this man at a local daily market. He asked the pair to come by and pick up some fresh tins from his home, which was found on Cochise Drive in Dewey, Arizona. The man's name is John Famularo. Born in Long Island, New York in 1957, he and his family moved to Orange County when he was still very young. John was described as quiet and awkward, but despite this shy facade, he often misbehaved during school, had difficulty learning due to antisocial behaviour, and didn't care for those around him, and this was probably due to the way he was raised. Although Angelo was a kind and caring parent, his mother Anne was the total opposite. She was extremely strict, and often used her religion to scare her children into obedience. In fact, Anne was so controlling that she wouldn't allow John or his siblings to see their friends after school. And when they were teenagers, they were forbidden to date or be in relationships. I won't go into it, but Anne insisted on watching her children herself, even into their teenage years. And apparently, this brought along some rather disgusting encounters between her and her children. John and his siblings were also prohibited from speaking to each other unless given permission. They were all banned from talking about politics and religion, and were only allowed to sit in specific seats in the living and dining room. John's abnormal childhood is likely a direct reflection of his mother's hostile and compulsive behaviours, and eventually, this would later make its way into his adult life too. After moving out of the family home in his late teens, John made several attempts to put himself into a professional career. However, every time he did this, he would fail. Following in his brother's footsteps, who, by the way, was fired for sexual misconduct, John first tried to become a chiropractor, but he dropped out before finishing his course. After that, he tried to fulfill his dream of becoming a police officer, but he failed training a total of 4 times, and gave up after that. Ultimately, John settled on the more straightforward path of house painting, and with this job being both public and close proximity, he managed to spark up multiple relationships with women. This man was a strange and potentially dangerous individual, but at least in this moment of time, he had never been arrested or in trouble with the law. That would all change shortly after he met Elaine and Jack. Although John remained calm at the open-air market, he appeared to be uncomfortable with them near his home. John rummaged through the paint cans and ushered the couple off the driveway as if he were in a rush. He told them he had moved to Arizona about 6 months prior, but this statement was odd, as his home was packed with junk, boxes and debris. They also noted that there were hundreds of paint cans littering his garden. The most significant item on the property was a rental truck, but if he had moved here only 6 months prior, then why did he need it? After collecting the paint from John, the family returned to the car, where, below the dashboard, Elaine wrote down his number plate. The plate was Californian, and not even registered to their home state. Believing the truck had been stolen, Elaine reported it to the police. Authorities ran this plate through the registry, and, lo and behold, it was reported missing 6 months prior. With a search warrant in hand, they then attended the Famularo residence, and as they began to inspect the property, they noticed a cord running from the truck into his home. Approaching the truck with bolt cutters, they gained entry through the back door. Paint cans, cardboard boxes, and plastic bags filled the container, and nestled amongst all the junk was a freezer. At least they could now guess why there was a power cord connected to the truck, but believing the freezer would contain drugs, they called in the narcotics team. Authorities opened the freezer door, however, they were unprepared for what they would find. Peering in, they could see a pile of plastic bags, and reaching out from an opening was a human hand. Removing the top layer of plastic bags revealed the frozen body of a young woman. She was lying in a semi-fetal position, with handcuffed hands behind her back. Her face was covered in duct tape, from her eyes down to her mouth. To add to this, she was also entirely naked. Her skull was shattered, so much so that shards of it had left holes in some of the bags that encased her. Shocked officers then resealed the freezer to preserve the body for a proper autopsy. John watched the gruesome discovery unfold from his window, and of course, he was arrested immediately. The man was emotionless. He said almost nothing throughout his arrest, only ending his silence to ask for a lawyer. The body was later examined by forensics, where they had to use a hairdryer to thaw certain body parts for examination. This was necessary to obtain more accurate results for things such as fingerprints. The fingerprints from the body were found to match a Californian driver's license, and sadly, it was of Denise Huber. It would take days for officers to search John's overly hoarded house. He clearly had a problem throwing anything away, and fortunately, this included vital evidence. They eventually found various suspicious items and many of Denise's belongings. In a box labelled Christmas, they found her shoes, purse, makeup, and keys. The box also contained the outfit that she wore the night she disappeared, which had been torn down one side. In another box, authorities found matching duct tape, blood-stained rags, men's clothing, a nail puller, and finally, a blood-stained hammer. DNA analysis would later confirm that the blood was Denise's. Even throughout his questioning, John never actually disclosed what happened to Denise. But with the way her car had been left, Denise's body, and the evidence found in the house, it all painted a relatively clear picture of the night's events. There was no actual sign of a struggle at the site of the car, but Denise's shoes were scuffed and damaged as if they had been dragged along the floor. It is therefore possible that Denise had been lured away from the car. Inside John's home, police uncovered 2 fake police uniforms, which John may have used to create a false sense of security with Denise. Either way, John had somehow managed to get Denise into his car. He then handcuffed her and drove her to a warehouse, where he was both working and living at the time. Due to the shipping labels found on the boxes inside his house, police knew of this location, and after obtaining a search warrant to inspect the warehouse, they found a deep brown stain behind the new dry wall. Sadly, again upon testing, it turned out to be Denise's blood. While at the warehouse, John covered Denise's face in duct tape and then plastic bags, where he then proceeded to sexually assault her. and once he was finished, he violently struck her with the hammer and nail puller. Forensics could confirm that he had struck her head a minimum of 30 times, leaving her skull in many pieces. John would then leave Denise's body out in the open for 3 whole days. We know this because a receipt for when he bought the freezer on June the 6th was found in his house. With thanks to John's hoarding tendencies, he had made it very easy for police to create a relatively accurate theory on what occurred in June of 1991. John was clearly a sick and twisted man. During their search, authorities would find snippets from newspapers and articles about Denise, including a missing persons poster. A VHS tape was also found in the house, which contained an emotional appeal from her parents Dennis and Ione Huber. Following all of this evidence, a rather strong case was built against John. However, it would take authorities 3 whole years to compile all of it properly. But as all of us know, good things come to those who wait. And finally, on May 8, 1997, John stood trial for the kidnapping, sodomy, and first-degree murder of Denise Huber. There was actually so much evidence against his charge of murder that John's defense team simply didn't try to challenge it. Instead, they focused on his other charges. His defense team argued that Denise was not kidnapped, as there was no evidence or sign of struggle at the crime scene. And to add to this, they could not prove that John had caused damage to her shoes. They also argued that the freezing and thawing process could have interfered with autopsy results, and therefore discredit accusations that he had sexually assaulted her. However, this was not a good enough defense, and after weeks of deliberation, John was found guilty on all 3 charges. He was therefore sentenced to the most severe punishment the law would allow, the death penalty. To this day, he is still on death row. As for Dennis and Ione, they finally had some form of justice for their daughter, but the trial would create fresh wounds too. They had already grieved for their daughter when she disappeared, and again when she was discovered. And now, with all the fresh evidence in front of them, they would have to process all of these new facts and begin the healing process all over again. Crimes like this affect local communities heavily, and for Orange County in particular, they really grieved for the loss of Denise Huber. Disappearances hang in the air for a very long time, and nobody knew what exactly happened to her for more than 3 long years. Denise had the rest of her life ahead of her, and at the age of 23, she was ready to begin her independent adult life. She had dreams of visiting England in the summer, before settling down and focusing on her career. In all this time that she has lost, she could have become a wife, a mother, and even a grandmother. And as these stories go, that life was callously taken away by an ice-hearted killer. And that just about wraps up today's case. But thank you so much folks for watching another video today by Coffee House Crime. If you found this video interesting or you learned something new, then please remember to like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. And as always, please share your thoughts in the comment section down below. I'll see you again real soon for another video folks, but until that moment arrives, please remember to look after each other and stay safe. Thank you and goodbye.